Hey, I'm Grant. If you're watching this, this is a tutorial on how to kind of do a simple little project in Lightworks. This doesn't really have any specific goal in mind. This is just a video I'm putting out anyway, and I wanted to walk myself through the whole process so that even if things might vary for you, or you might be on a different version, or you don't need certain steps, this should give you something to start with. Or if you're not doing a step and you have some issues, maybe one of those could hopefully correct something. So basically the background of this is I put out a simple little series on a game I play called OSRS every week. It's just me talking about stuff. It's game footage from OBS that's recorded on this same PC. And then I have a recording of a voiceover I did after the fact in Audacity, the same thing I'm recording this in right now. So I have set up my folders like so. I really recommend having a good workflow. It doesn't have to match mine, but having consistent places to put your files so that they're somewhere you know where they can go when you end up with a whole bunch and you can come back later is a big deal. So the first thing I do is, once I have actually made the things, I have this original sources folder. And I do this because no matter what I do, if I mess up something with a file somehow, I'll always have my originals. I keep them separate. So here we have the Audacity recording, the original, and then we have the gameplay footage here, fighting the mole. These are my originals, and you can actually go in here and I can show off what I use. I'll have a link down below in the description for some of these programs, but one I really recommend if you're new is Media Info. What that does is I can pop up a nice little description of all the different things that make up a media file. So here I can show off just different things, what format it's in, you can see how long it is, bitrate, all that stuff. This is one of the things where this may not mean a lot to you right now, but if you need help, this is extremely helpful to give to someone. Be like, this is my file, because you can go in and see like some errors that might not be apparent. Like, okay, I'm going to load this up. I say it's 60 FPS and it might report 5 FPS. That's something that might not be immediately apparent as an issue, but this can really help diagnose those. So I heavily recommend using it. And since it's just a simple right click when you install it on Windows, it's extremely helpful. I personally use VLC to play these back if I need to. I think you can also use Chrome if you have nothing else, or I assume you have something built in on your PC. It really doesn't matter too much unless you're doing very high level stuff. So the first thing I personally do with all my stuff is I go over into Handbrake, and Handbrake is just a little conversion tool. Very powerful if you know what you're doing, but we're going to use it for just one simple thing. And what I personally do is I'll come in here and I'm going to set this as a constant frame rate. Lightworks and any other heavily professional editor usually wants a constant frame rate. This is, I think, one of the biggest issues that comes up for like someone who's new to this. Like if you're doing something from either a cell phone that's fairly long or from some kind of video capture like an Elgato, that kind of thing, it's likely that if you actually pop that open in media info, it's not a constant frame rate. It's variable. And you can get away with that if it's variable because it's 30 FPS for the whole thing and drops like 2. That's fine. You can deal with that. But if you have say a PC that's using your game capture that can't quite keep up, or just your cell phone is doing other things at the time when you're filming, you can actually start dropping frames, and Lightworks doesn't like that. My understanding of it is because Lightworks actually pops it out into several different images and actual audio samples, so there's no correlation to what audio sample goes to what image, and it causes desync issues. Whereas when you just play it in a video editor, it might look fine because it just starts the video file and the audio file at the same time, and these move together. Well, in Lightworks, that's not true, and that's the power of it. That's why it doesn't take forever to process, like if you actually loaded it into Windows Movie Maker. So I usually come in here. This is something I don't always do if it's a small footage, but I think is an important thing to call out. I'll come in here, set constant frame rate. You can mess with these as much as you want, but I'll generally use these settings. Go ahead and make sure it's this right one. If you have multiple files in a batch, because you can do that, you'll have to select here. Then I'm going to say where I want it to go. I have this cleaning files folder. That's just somewhere for me to dump all my extra cleaning files. So like when I do my audio podcast, I'll say export at several different sample levels so I can see what the file size is. But well, I want to keep them. I don't want those to be in my way, so I export there. Here, I have actually already done this, so I can tell it to replace. But this is just you don't have to watch me actually load this. So I go ahead, start encoding it, and I would wait for it to finish. This is a great thing to load up like a batch of and just wait and just like let it run overnight. So eventually when that finishes, I end up with this file that I've already set up. At this point it is 60 FPS, but it's not necessarily in the format that I want, or I might have other sources. So the second thing I like to call out is I use this tool called EyeFrame Converter. This is a video converter specifically designed to go with Lightworks. And what it does is it takes basically any file, like a video or audio, and you can dump it in here, and it will convert it to one consistent format that's meant to work very well with Lightworks. You can convert it to other things, but I recommend these settings. And if anything, if it doesn't work, at least it's consistent. You don't have to worry about maybe one file being really bad. You can't figure out why. It makes it much easier to diagnose if you do this. So basically I'll just come in here, tap convert. These are the default settings. I personally use this, but you might want to work on this for you. I know one thing I like this for is I view this as it fully elaborates the file. So it makes these massive file sizes, but because they're all, I think of them as explained, is the way I think of it, then Lightworks knows how to interpret them exactly. There's no assumptions in how the video is encoded, but it does make a pretty big file size. So you might also want to try something a little bit smaller. It really is up to you, and you just kind of have to experiment with this depending on what kind of files you use and where they come from. So I'll do that. One thing to call out is if your PC is slower or you're having trouble, like say, I know I'll do multicam editing with like 4 different cameras rolling. Well, that's too much for my hard drive to handle to actually pull the data. So you can make what are called proxies, and I'll cover this in a different video. Proxies essentially make extra copies of every single file in the same format, same resolution, but what it does is it greatly compresses it and lowers the bit rate. And what the goal is you can import them all into Lightworks or whatever editor you have, and then swap them when the program's closed to use the dumb proxies. So then it's really responsive because it's not pulling massive amounts of data, but it is still enough that you can edit everything, and then you swap them at the end before you export, and then go. And it should be just like as if you had the actual files the whole time, but it's not a heavy load on your PC. So basically same thing, come in here, I hit OK. It would run for a little while. Depending on your PC, that's going to take anywhere from like 1 minute to 20, and it just depends on your video files. And what I basically end up here with is these converted sources. So I'll have this one mole video that has gone through both of these conversions. So this is, I think of it as sterilized. I can go ahead and import this, as well as I have just the Audacity file that I exported. So I did my recording in Audacity. I did an export at the highest sample rate that I was recorded in, spit it out here. The audio files are pretty easy. So we're going to go ahead and pull up Lightworks. I'm going to be creating a new project for this. So this is going to be Lightworks tutorial, basic workflow. We only have one audio and one video, so I'm actually just going to go ahead and choose auto here. If you have different frame rates, you will need to take into consideration which one you do, and you'll have to kind of experiment. But generally speaking, if all your stuff is coming from the same source with the same frame rates, auto is going to be okay. So we go ahead and we create, and we have our new project. I like to just go ahead and import everything. So there are going to be our 2 media files right there. You can see them importing. If this was successful, they should show up here. If not, you will get an error message, and hopefully you can diagnose that. Another important thing to call out, because I think this trips people up, is if you look into all your video sources, you will see this mol.mp4 LVIX file. And this is not Lightworks converting. This is actually an additional file to leave your original untouched. And that's a very important distinction on how this stuff works. Is basically when you edit in Lightworks or a very similar editor, what it does is it has a log file, and this log file collects all the changes. So it doesn't actually work on your file at any point. It doesn't go in and cut stuff. Instead, you get this log file, and then when you hit export, it makes a copy of your original stuff, and then it does the actual edit. So at no point should you ever be able to destroy your original stuff. And I know that's something people will freak out, like, hey, I imported it, it converted everything, and now I can't find my original, like, I can't get it back, what happened? So don't worry, nothing happened, and if you delete this file, it's not a huge deal. I believe this isn't actually the log itself, but rather just reference material. The log itself is stored wherever you installed Lightworks. So even if you delete this, this is recoverable. You'll just have to go back in and point what it thinks, say the mol file is, to the actual thing. So I actually wanted to also cover a couple other things. Is I have a end card I put on, very simple. It's going to show off some of the effects, so I'm going to drag that in as well, and we see it there. So now that we have all 3 of our imports, you can organize them into bins or basically folders if you want, but we're going to start off with a new edit. Now, this is going to pop up massive because I normally edit on my 4K screen, because when I do several different sizes and different video feeds, it's useful. But now I'm on my 720p, so I got to go ahead and shrink this down. I will call out, this is using the flexible layout. You can also use the other one. It is the same, you just probably can't position everything like I am. And this should be fairly consistent between versions, but you can let me know and I can hopefully figure it out. I can rearrange this stuff easily enough. I can probably show it how it is in your settings too. So I personally am going to go add and or delete some tracks because this was the setting for my podcast that has 4 video feeds. For this, we don't need that many, but you can. So I want to call this out. You can add more video, more audio, but I'm going to go ahead and just start deleting these. So I only need, I believe, 2 of these. Yeah, let's go with that. That should be good. We're going to go ahead and drag our stuff in. So I put this right here. I toggle these off because I don't want to overwrite them. Then I drag in my voiceover. One thing to note is my voiceover is a mono track and I want stereo, so I'm going to fake that by going to tracks. I'm going to ungroup my audio. So now they're separate. And I'm just going to drag another one in. And this just lets it come over both speakers. This is an easy way. You can go into the audio mixer if you want to do something fancier, but this works. So I will go ahead and relink those. This doesn't really do anything too crazy. It just lets me toggle them together and lets Lightworks know that these are meant to kind of go together. You can do even more, but this is just helpful for editing. Like say, I know what I'll do is I'll purposely link like say 3 tracks together so I can toggle them on and off just as a shortcut. All right. Another thing is here, we'll be seeing this. It is generating the waveforms. This is something personally I make sure finishes. You can edit anyway, it's not a huge deal. But since it has to actually interact with the file, I find it to be pretty unresponsive if you don't wait for this to be done. And that's not a big deal. I just usually make sure that once it's done converting, I just throw this in, set up the edit before I'm ready to actually work. So that way everything's done. So while that happens, we can actually edit on some other stuff. So I personally know that I don't want any more footage than what I talk over. So let me just kind of sample this, what's on this. I believe I actually want to shove this around, so I'm just going to do this so they kind of sync up how I want. I'm going to cut in, here I'll not use my hotkeys. Although if you're doing any amount of editing, you should really learn the hotkeys to Lightworks or do your own custom ones because it saves a massive amount of time. So what I did was I marked an out, that's this blue tab right here. I skipped, it's going to skip to the next cut, which is the beginning. I'm going to do the in, and what this says is, think of this like highlighting text in, say, Microsoft Word or something, where I'm saying I want to work on this section. Like this is the section I care about. And I'm just going to cut. If I undo that, the other option you have here is remove, which just says don't remove the edit black space. So if I do that there, it basically refills it with blank. But I want to do that. Next, I'm going to go chop off the end. So I'm going to do a mark in. I'm going to skip twice. And you don't actually have to have 2 of the blue marks. You only need to have 1. And if you only have 1, it will use your red one. Again, this is something where it's not required at all. And technically, it's a little bit more explicit to like always say exactly where you want to cut. But this saves time considering the number of cuts you're going to do. So definitely consider it. So here we have our cuts. Very simple. Now, one thing I have is I left in-game audio. So I can just like play some simple stuff here.
In any kind of game you
obviously
ever played,
the music is too loud for my voiceover. So what we're going to do is we're going to go find the audio mixer, which should have popped in somewhere. It might have popped in off screen, which is one of the annoying things about working between different monitors in Lightworks. Let me go find this. So if you're wondering, I'm just popping this over to my 4K monitor right now, which has OBS and stuff on it. There we go. So just so I can easily drag this over. Now we have our edit. Pretty well laid out, and all of the waveforms are done. So I'm just going to label this one. This is 17. This was Dungeons. So we have a title. This just helps me go back, and if I need to reopen this, I can. So I recommend editing that. Okay. Then we are going to adjust our audio tracks. I'm going to do a later video on this, on how this actually works. But essentially, each one of these corresponds with one of these here, the audio tracks. So what I want to do is I want to lower these down because I don't want this A1, the game track essentially, to basically be too loud for my voiceover. This is just something you want to experiment with. These are not linked, so I can edit them differently. This is one of the reasons why if you wanted to actually do the left-right stuff differently, make a mono track that goes to both, then you could toggle it so that these are just the same thing. You can do that all here. Or if you want 2 tracks, one going only to the left, one going to the right, it's all up to you, but this is where you edit it. So this should be a bit good. Let me get my headphones here so I can actually verify this. Comes to mind when you hear the word dungeon. I think of some kind of gauntlet, a player running and defeating traps. So that works pretty much. Like, these are very just lightweight little series I'm doing, so I'm not too worried about this being perfect. So in this thing, what I personally do is I like having these little end cards where over on the left side I can put some YouTube end cards over this. If not, it's just kind of some neat little art saying like, oh hey, thanks for watching, please subscribe. You'll see it at the end of this video as well. And the way I do that is I just go into GIMP or Photoshop and I make a simple little image, and I have a template that always has this big green square. And what you can't see is this is a PNG file. This green square is actually transparent, and that's important because we'll be putting our image in there. So what I like to do is I like to make mine exactly 10 seconds. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to put in 10 seconds so I get exactly that every time, which is important for doing templates. Then to make this easy, I'm just going to go set that to the start, and I should be able to pop this in right here. If I don't misclick, there we go. We have a 10-second clip we can put anywhere. I put it at the end because it's an end card. Okay, gonna pop over using my hotkeys, and then I'm going to make a cut. I'm going to zoom in here. This is something that I'm not actually deleting any footage, but it makes it easier to apply effects. So what I'm doing is I'm going to do a in cut and then an out cut on the same exact frame. And then you can do either of these. I usually do Z. And what that does is you can't actually see the transition so if I make a cut like right here and play, you can't see that cut transition whatsoever. It's basically just one seamless video, but it's useful because then I can drag this around independently. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. So now we have basically 2 10-second clips that I can apply these effects to. So effects, you can have custom effects. I use what's called a DVE. Chances are if you're looking to do effects, you are either going to use a DVE, title, blend, or dissolve. Those are basically everything you're going to need unless you're doing color work. And those would be separate tutorials, but I basically recommend if you want to do any kind of image scaling, image rotation, zoom in, zoom out, those kind of transitions, you want the DVE. I personally have certain ones that I do consistently, so I have those marked as favorites because they already have the settings that I need. So I'm going to go in here and do favorites. Let's expand this list. And what this does is, this is why I very specifically use templates on my end cards, is so that I can just come in here and it makes it very easy. So an easy one here is the end screen DVE. I'm going to drop that on my footage. And here we see it's nice and tiny. Now there is one issue, is that this green is still over it because Lightworks doesn't actually kick in the transparency until you use the blend effect, which basically says from top down, it's going to blend all these images. And there's other ways to actually get similar effects, but this is the way I evaluate it and kind of try to be consistent. So if you actually remember to do it properly and do your transparencies and not just export it as a green image, you can actually come in here and drop the blend and it will start working. So here we have our nice little footage, and this is essentially done at this point. So what this is it just kicks over here. You can throw on a dissolve if you want, like a fade to black, that whole thing. But what it gets us is I get my end card and it gets the footage, and I can still actually let this video play and my voiceover continues. Really simple effects. You can use this for lower thirds. You can use this to zoom in, zoom out. It's very simple, and I assume you can figure it out. If not, let me know. So we have our completed video here, nice and simple. We should cover the big majority, so the only thing we need now is to export. So we're going to come down here, export. By default, this should be set to your currently selected edit, and your currently selected edit is the one that has record on it. So this should be checked. Even if you have multiple open and you have one kind of in focus, the one you care about is the one that has record. That's very important. And you can confirm this because the name should be here. If this says something else like bin 1, then you are going to be exporting something other than you intend to. So just make sure you check that if you run into issues. This is done on the paid version of Lightworks. If you're doing the free version, you will have less options here, but this is essentially the same. You'll be doing the YouTube, I believe 720p export, so this should look similar. So I just go in and leave this whatever. I'll probably be doing 30 FPS because as I showed earlier, that's my source footage. And then I do 1080p because that's what this is shot in and recorded in. Very simple. In the region, you can use anything you want. I use ignore leading and trailing black. What this could mean is mark section means if you had, say, this and this, it would export only this section. If you did whole sequence, it would do literally everything. Leading and trailing black means you don't necessarily have to cut off the ends. And if it sees that there's nothing else played, like there's no audio and there's no video, it will go ahead and export just that. So I usually take that because that way it helps prevent, say, some extra thing where I export a 10-minute video, not realizing that I have 50 minutes of black space after it. So it's just a nice little check. We're going to go ahead and select the folder. So we go 17, and then I pop this in my final videos just to keep everything nice and separate. Hit OK. And then name, if you want to name something different, you can now. I like to just export and then I name the final file after I know it's what I want it to be. And hit start. This will pop this open. You can actually continue to work if you want. That depends on how good your PC is. If it's really good, this doesn't actually slow you down at all, or if like your footage is on a different hard drive. But generally speaking, this is where I would go, like, go get some water, go to the bathroom, go do some chores, whatever. It's depending on your video and how good your PC is. This may take a small length of time or no time at all. But you can actually pop over into that folder and see it's being produced in real time. So, very simple thing. Like I said, this probably won't solve every issue you have, but this video should give you a good basis. My goal here isn't necessarily to solve, again, every single problem, but I hope that this at least gets you asking the right questions. You can contact me if you have questions either in the comments below this video, on my channel, or you can reach me over on Twitter. It's at taken4grandD, or on my email, which is grant@taken4grandD.com. And hopefully I can work some simple stuff out. I'm going to keep making some of these tutorials because I know there aren't a ton of great resources, as I'm sure the viewer has seen. And I know a lot of the really good ones that are out there are meant for people who are probably at a higher level than someone who is using this as their first editing program, or the last one was just like Windows Media Player. So hopefully you found this useful. If not, let me know if there's something I can do. Otherwise, a like or subscribe really helps get this out there over some of the worst tutorials. And I would love to see if you have any ideas or questions to ask. I would love to make them into a simple little tutorial like this, just so it's out there, and even if you had a problem solving an issue, hopefully someone else can use it to get over that just a little bit quicker and try to better understand this. So once again, I'm Grant, and thanks for watching. Hopefully this helped you.